wanted to start an incense business in Toronto, and Jagadish sent me down to LA to Jayatirtha to learn the incense business from him. And since I knew Prabhupada was going to be in Rath Yatra in San Francisco, just prior to that, I asked if I could go a little early so I might be able to see him, because none of us had ever seen him. And so he said, all right. So I went to the Rath Yatra in San Francisco when they had the funeral home, and actually spent a whole day driving around with, who's that famous Rath Yatra devotee that died? Jayananda. We spent a whole day together driving around watching, we were collecting donations and things. So I got to hang out with him during Rath Yatra, for which he is the most famous, you know. And finally the day came when Prabhupada was coming in. We all went to the airport, and there was hundreds of us. And we were waiting anxiously, and the plane was late. And we were in the waiting room just at the doors where the people come off the plane. And it was interesting because there was a kind of a, what do you call it, a divider there. So you couldn't actually see the people walking up the hallway. You could just see them all coming out from either side. And we waited and waited, and I think the plane was 20 minutes late, so it just intensified our anxiety and anticipation. And, you know, many of us hadn't seen Prabhupada, and I was just wondering, you know, what's it going to be like when I finally see him, because I'd seen so many pictures. And the plane landed, and then everything built up. It became more intense, and we were chanting. And then all of a sudden, the first passengers started coming off, and of course they were shocked because they saw all these devotees there. It was like, oh my God, what's going on here? And the devotees that were closest to the divider were the ones that were going to see him first. And finally, after a certain number of people came off, you could just feel a wave as they saw Prabhupada coming, and they got excited, and it built up, and it kind of just like a wave through, and then Prabhupada came around the divider, and as soon as I saw him, tears poured from my eyes. I just flowed like a water faucet. And it was so unbelievable. It was so good. And then I just paid my obeisances, and I just cried. And I was just so happy. It was wonderful. We had a temple president who was artificially austere, Dharmaraj, always making us eat little, just, you know, to be austere. And we were always in anxiety and would always pig out at the feast. And like everyone else, we were addicted to halava. There was just something about halava that was irresistible. So we were going to Detroit, and we didn't eat very much that day, and he made this huge thing of halava, but he wouldn't let us eat any. So all the way down, all I was thinking about was halava. And it was right there, and I was trying to steal some, you know, and eat it. And I was in total anxiety. I'm thinking, here I am going to see the spiritual master, a pure devotee, and I'm thinking of halava. So I was so ashamed of myself, but I was in anxiety. So finally we got there, and then they said, Prabhupada's going to stay in this devotee's parents' house. We need some volunteers to clean the house. Who wants to volunteer? And everybody's putting up their hand, and I thought, oh, well, put up your hand, you stupid idiot, you know, I mean, don't be a sourpuss. So they picked me. Meanwhile, my service at the temple had been cleaning the bathroom, and I had a lot of realizations cleaning the bathroom. I just surrendered, and I got into it, and I made it like a real, you know, good service, and I just accepted it, you know, that I was a toilet cleaner. So I would clean the bathroom very thoroughly, and I just became proud of being a toilet cleaner, you know, and I thought about the Gita a lot. So I made a lot of spiritual advancement in the bathroom. And when I went to the house, they said, okay, we need somebody to clean the bathroom. I said, me. So I was in ecstasy cleaning the bathroom. I felt like I'd been trained for this. So when Prabhupada finally came, they had this huge plate of fruit and everything, and we sat down with Prabhupada, and he said, well, have some, and we're kind of picking at it. Like, and Prabhupada said, never be shy in business or eating, prasadam. So we just ate, and I never forgot that. So I was never shy from that point on in business or prasadam. Normally, probably in about 90% of the time, Prabhupada would give a name that had the first letter of your Western name. So I thought, being Ron, my name would be Ram or something like that. But instead, Prabhupada gave me the name Uttamasloka. And he said to me, your name is Uttamasloka, Krishna who is praised with transcendental songs. I had been a musician, and you know, I had enjoyed some local, you know, notoriety, and wanted in the beginning to use my musical abilities to serve Krishna, writing songs and whatnot. And I always wanted to do something like that. And when Prabhupada gave me that name and said, Krishna who is praised with transcendental songs, I just was in ecstasy. I thought it was wonderful, you know. So, you know, I thought that was very special. And then again, I got Gayatri at the same time, so Prabhupada spoke it into my ear personally. So that was also auspicious. I had found a building in Toronto, a big church on Avenue Road, which is a very, very good location, and a huge building, wonderful building, and perfect. And this Christian group was moving out to a new place, and It was for sale for $500,000. And all the realtors kept telling us about this place, so there was all this attention focused on it. And it was the best place we had found in years of looking. So I went to Prabhupada and I told him, about the building. And they introduced Prabhupada. This is the temple president from Toronto, Uttamasloka. Prabhupada, we found this building. It's amazing. It's this huge church. The temple room is like 40 feet high ceilings. There's space for brahmachari quarters. I described everything to him and he said, sounds great. How much do they want? And I said, well, they want $500,000. And we had never paid that much for a building. And he said, that's a lot of money. What's the use of buying anxiety? Then all you're thinking about is collecting money. We don't need to purchase anxiety. That's not our business. Our business is, to remember Krishna, and that's all. So, it's a good location? I said, oh yes, Prabhupada. Good condition? Oh, beautiful, Prabhupada. It's on this main road. Everybody drives. But what's the use of purchasing anxiety? It's, we don't need that. It's not, we don't want to purchase anxiety. I said, yeah, okay. Big temple room? Yes, Prabhupada. Nice temple room. Wonderful. Maybe you could come to Toronto and see it. Maybe we'll come, Okay. Now, I can't remember if he asked to see me again. I don't think he asked to see me again. Maybe once more, but I can't remember. So anyway, he finally came to Toronto about 3 weeks later, after Philadelphia. He wasn't going to come, then he was, then he wasn't. Meantime, I took over Chicago, but because I was still in Toronto, I got to host him with Vishwakarma. So we picked him up at the airport and drove home in the car, and he said, can we go see the building? And I said, sure. We arranged to go see it, and they'd already moved out. So we drove him over to the building, and we took him on a tour, and there was one of the Christian guys left there. And we're looking around, and I'm telling him, here's the temple room, and here's the prasadam room, and this, and we'll do this here and that there, and I got it all worked out, and yada, yada, yada. And then we're walking by this table, and they've got some leftover books, and one of them says, what does God look like? Prabhupada looks at it, and he picks it up, and he said, ask him if we can buy this. I said, can we buy this book? He said, you can have it. I said, okay. So we get in the car, and Prabhupada says, read something to me. Read the book. So I started reading the book, and it was just going nowhere. He said, they don't know what God looks like. It's just a bluff. And then, so we get back to the house, and it's getting later on in the day, and Prabhupada's thinking about it. And so we're all excited from the day, and it's about 10 o'clock at night. And the phone call comes. Prabhupada wants to see you. Come over to the apartment right away. So I go over to the apartment, and he said, do you have all the plans, the blueprints, how you're going to lay it out and everything? Yes. Oh, yes, Prabhupada, I have everything. He goes, I think this would be an ideal temple. I said, yes, Prabhupada, it would be, wonderful. And then he says, how much do they want? I said, 500,000. He goes, well, why don't we go there, and you ask if they'll take $300,000. How much do you have? I said, well, we have about 40,000. He said, can you get another 60? I said, well, we can try. And he said, Brahmananda, how much do we have in the BBT? He said, well, we have 200 and something. He goes, give them 200,000. He goes, Prabhupada, we've never given that much at all to anybody. He goes, that's okay, give it to them. And see if they'll take 300,000 cash. And tell them we'll worship Lord Jesus next to Lord Krishna on the altar. So we'll preserve the Christian element, so to speak. And he said, so do you think they'll do that? I said, well, we can only try. And I said, but he said, can you handle the payments on 300,000? I said, well, Prabhupada, that's an awful lot of money. I said, we don't want to purchase anxiety. He goes, no, there must be anxiety. Otherwise, we'll simply be sitting around eating prasadam and getting fat. There must be anxiety. He just slammed his fist on the table. I was like, okay. Completely reversed what he said. Well, we don't want to purchase anxiety. There must be anxiety. Everybody was shocked. Everybody was shocked. This particular incident took place in Toronto, and I believe it was 1976. And we were in the new temple there. I was president of Chicago, but I had been president of Toronto. Vishwakarma was then the president. So we were up there, because it was only the second time that Prabhupada had come there. And it was a morning walk, and I don't know why, but I didn't go on that morning walk. But after it was over, Vishwakarma came up to me to tell me what had gone down. And he told Prabhupada that He said, Prabhupada, lately the brahmacharis are manifesting a lot of agitation. They're very disturbed, having difficulty maintaining their brahmachari mood. And we don't know what to do, how to deal with this. And Prabhupada said, well, if they're agitated, just get them out, tell them to get married. What's the problem? And Vishwakarma said, well, but Prabhupada, you know, all the big devotees, the sannyasis, they tell them if they get married, they're going to be falling down. And Prabhupada said, how can you fall when you're already fallen? In other words, where do they think they're falling from, that they're so exalted? And he said, besides, the sannyasis are not the big devotees. A big devotee is somebody who's humble and sincere and serving Krishna. That's a big devotee, not a sannyasi. He said, I only give these guys sannyas because they keep bothering me. So just so they'll stop bothering me, I'd give them sannyas to get, you know, to leave me alone. Prabhupada said, he asked me if we were distributing the books. You're distributing the books? Is that going well? I said, yes, Prabhupada. We're distributing a lot of books. And I gave him the figures, and they were impressive. And he said, you're distributing the books, but are you reading them too? I said, oh, yes, Prabhupada. Every day we have 4 classes. And then he smiled at me, like this big smile. It was almost like a surprise. And he said, oh, thank you very much. And I just was washed with an incredible feeling of satisfaction that I had, you know, pleased him. And it was true, because we would have nectar of devotion one day and then nectar of instruction the other day. We'd alternate and then do Bhagavatam. And then at night we'd have Krishna book, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and Bhagavad-gita. And I told him that, and he was very, very happy. And I just remember this big smile coming over his face. And he said, and the devotees, they're coming? And I said, well, not really. Maybe every 6 months a few people join. You know, he said, that's all right. Manu shanam sahasreshu kaschid yatati siddhaye. Said, you know, out of thousands among men, maybe one is interested. And out of thousands of those, you know, maybe one becomes a devotee. So that's all right. Don't worry about it. We drove Prabhupada to a little function at an Indian's house with the people from the Indian community and devotees. And we had a big kirtan when we got in. And Prabhupada was sitting on the couch and chanting, and I was playing mridanga, and my son was there. He was about, I guess, how old was he? 3 or 4, and he had a little wooden drum, but he was kind of standing, staring, gawking at Prabhupada. And Prabhupada went like this, you know. He moved his hands like this, you know, play the drum, play the drum. And so Rad started playing, Radha Gopinath started playing. And we finished the kirtan, everybody stopped, and everybody thought Prabhupada would speak. But he looked over at Brahmananda and he said, you speak. And so Brahmananda was shocked. He was like, oh, you know, who wants to speak in front of the spiritual master? You know, it's just very unnerving. So he stood up and he stuttered and fumbled and said something, you know, philosophical. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, ha ha. It's a good thing I'm not a sannyasi, so Prabhupada can't get me, you know. Otherwise I'd be in trouble or something, you know, because they'll probably ask all of the sannyasis to speak. So Brahmananda sat down, and I look over at Prabhupada. He looks over at me, and he goes, now you speak. I almost froze to death. I was in shock, and I just stood there. I sat there, and I went, oh my God. And he goes, stand up. So I stood up, and I was in some kind of vacuum. I don't know what it was, and I just spoke. And I hope it was transcendental. Nobody laughed, which might not have been so good, because usually people laugh when I speak. But anyway, that was very shocking. So later on, we were having prasadam, and I said, Prabhupada, do you mind if we chant bhajans while you eat? He said, no, not at all. I said, Prabhupada, do you have any favorite melodies for Hare Krishna? He said, oh, yes. I said, which one? He said, all of them. We were driving home, and one of the cars pulled up beside us with one devotee, a Yodhyapati, who was the cook. And I said, Prabhupada, this is our cook. And I said, every day, every morning, we have rice, dal, chapatis, and really nice sabji, basmati rice. I described the whole, you know, dinner to him. And I said, we eat one main meal a day, and then just in the evening, you know, we have a little snack, because that's the most practical. He said, that's perfect, because Prabhupada had said that. One main meal a day, either in the morning or in the afternoon or evening. We chose the morning. So later on, when we went the next day to Montreal, and we were sitting in the airport waiting for Prabhupada's plane, one of the devotees, in fact it was Shivaram, he said, Prabhupada, is there any ideal diet for Sankirtan devotees? Prabhupada said, oh yes. He said, well, what is it? And he looked at me, he said, you tell him. So I described to him. what our prasadam program was, and he said, this is ideal. And prior to that, we were in the garden, because Prabhupada couldn't stay overnight, so he was just hanging out with the devotees. And he said, let's read from the Gita. So he had Jagadish read from the Gita some verses from chapter 8, I think, about leaving your body, quitting your body at a certain time. And so Jagadish read some verses, and he said, well, speak, say something. I thought, here we go again. And so Jagadish spoke, and he said, now you read and you speak. And he gave me the book, and he made me read and speak again. So I had a chance to speak in front of Prabhupada again. And after that, then Prabhupada left. So just as a kind of an epilogue to this, when the next festival came up, this was summer of 75, in 76, I believe it was, yeah. We were at the festival, and it took a few days for all the devotees to gather together, and then Prabhupada made his grand entrance from the second floor to the whole crowd, because everybody was there. And chanting and kirtan going on, and everybody looking at Prabhupada, waiting for some little small glance or, some acknowledgement, anything, just anything, even just in their direction. And Prabhupada was walking through the devotees, down the stairs, and down the pathway. And I was way down the end of the pathway, right at the walkway. And Prabhupada was walking down, and he looked at me, and he smiled. And he kept looking at me, and he kept smiling, and then he walked right over to me, and he stopped. Everybody was shocked, and he said, so, everything's going all right in Toronto and Chicago? I said, yes, Prabhupada, everything's going wonderful. Good, that's good. And then he looked at Amarendra, and he said, and is everything going good in Detroit? He said, oh, Prabhupada, I'm Amarendra, I'm not Govardhan. He goes, oh, okay, I'm sorry. Bon Maharaj, Prabhupada's godbrother, came to America, sponsored by Professor McDonald, I think McDonald, John McDonald, or something like that. He was a real nice professor, PhD in I guess, South Asian studies. He had gone to Mayapur and done his dissertation on Chaitanya Vaishnavism for his PhD, and taught at the Department of Religions in Toronto, and was very favorably disposed to us, and I became friends with him. And he sponsored Bon Maharaj coming over. And so we met Bon Maharaj at his house. We invited him to the temple. He came for a kirtan. He gave a lecture and spoke, with a certain degree of erudition and pretty articulate. And then we went, Professor McDonald arranged for a meeting with what was known as an ecumenical council in Toronto, which was a collection of heads, certain leaders of different religious groups, the Jewish community, the Baptists, the Christians, the Catholics, the Seventh-day Adventists, and on and on. And he came, and he had written a translation and commentary on Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the Nectar of Devotion. And so he gave a little talk, and it was very elevated. It was about, Radha and Krishna, and Radharani being the pleasure potency of Krishna. But he spoke in a language similar to Bhakti Siddhanta. That wasn't really everyday language, and if you really didn't know the basic principles, you wouldn't really get it. And I could see that they were just paying polite attention, but they weren't getting anything. So after he spoke, each one of them took a turn to say something. Well, we're really glad to have you, and we think in this, and religious unity, and blah, blah, blah. And, just saying all this useless things, just kind of trying to be nice. But they all went around the room, and then it came to me, and I could see they didn't really want me to speak, but of course, that was their problem, So I said, well, it's interesting to me. We're gathered here today, representatives of different spiritual groups in the community, and we've heard, Bon Maharaj from India speak about God, but yet I don't hear anybody else speaking about God. If that's the thing that we all have in common, why is it that we can't talk about that and explore one another's realizations or concepts or understandings of what God is or who God is, or like that? Because certainly we have that in common, and it seems rather strange that we're not doing that, and we're just sort of saying very light things that don't really mean anything. I can't remember what I said, but I know I agitated everybody. And so they all sort of took a turn shooting me down and speaking without looking at me and talking about fanaticism and this and that and the other thing. So I guess I did something right, because I really aggravated them and put them on the spot. So what happened was, in Toronto, when Prabhupada looked at the building, one of the other things that he talked to me about was he heard about this. And there was some morning walks that I heard about that he asked questions because people told him what I did. And so he talked to me. He said, well, what did Bon Maharaj say? So I told him to the best of my remembrance. And one of the things that Bon Maharaj said after I spoke was something to the effect that Lord Chaitanya never really preached. He just kind of chanted and, loved God and, didn't really preach any philosophy. And I can't remember exactly, but something to that effect. And I said, well, geez, that's not the way I understood it. That's not what my spiritual master said. But I didn't want to get too uppity in front of Prabhupada's godbrother out of respect. But I told Prabhupada that. And then Prabhupada started saying all sorts of things to shoot down the things that he had said. He said, no, Lord Chaitanya never said that. He did this, he did that. And I can't remember the details. But he gave so many references to Chaitanya Charitamrita where Lord Chaitanya did preach and did, get very specific about philosophy and who Krishna was and how we should understand all of that and how that fits into our devotional realization and progress. So that was a nice, exchange with Prabhupada, talking to him about Bon Maharaj. And he was very happy that I had said that and sort of challenged and created a disturbance like that. He thought that was cool. So we were in Toronto the next year. Prabhupada came back again. We had the building this time. So he came back to the new temple. And I was president of Chicago, and Madhavananda had taken over from Govardhan in Detroit. And at one point, Prabhupada said there was some discussion about Detroit and the Indian community wasn't happy or whatever. And he said, well, what can't Govardhan? Oh, well, Govardhan isn't president anymore. Who is? Oh, Madhavananda's president. Well, why is he president? Well, Govardhan was having trouble. He wasn't chanting his rounds. Well, how do you know he wasn't chanting his rounds? Well, Prabhupada, he said he wasn't. Well, at least he's honest enough to admit it. You say you are. How do I know you are? Maybe you're lying. At least but Prabhupada, he wasn't coming to the morning program. Well, you have to encourage him. Put him back as president. He did so much good work there. He should be temple president. So Govardhan got reinstated as temple president. Well, this, of course, Sri Govinda, I had taken over from him, and he was absolutely livid that he got replaced as temple president. It was absolutely justifiable, But anyway, we won't get into that. But and ironically, I had taken over Montreal from Sri Pati, and I took over Chicago from Sri Govinda. And when I was there, it was such a disaster. I said to Jagadish, you got to send me somebody to help me out. I need a couple of right-hand soldiers. So he said, all right, I'll send some people to help you. He sent Sri Pati and Sri Govinda. I said, oh, gee, thanks. So somehow or another, I managed to use an appropriate amount of diplomacy. Sri Pati was fine. We were best of friends. But Sri Govinda, it was very difficult for him to accept me. But it was very easy for everybody else to not accept him. So he wrote this big thing. I don't know, I heard it was 10 pages or 20 pages of why he should be temple president of Chicago and I shouldn't. And he tried like everything to meet Prabhupada here and there to present it to him in hopes that, like Govardhan, he would be reinstated. So finally, I guess it was in New York, I heard that he got a chance to go to Prabhupada and say, Prabhupada, I've written this thing. I want you to read it. I should be president of Chicago, and I think it's a good thing. And Prabhupada said, oh, change is good. Sometimes change is good. Let's leave things the way they are. I remember Prabhupada saying once, I think Satsvarup asked him, how can we accelerate our advancement in Krishna consciousness? Morning walk in Mayapur. Prabhupada said, just think that I'm going to die in 1 minute. If you knew you were going to die in a minute, how accelerated would your consciousness be focused on Krishna? So if you think like that, I could die in a minute. That kind of mindset will give you the kind of intensity of focus that you need. One time I asked him, I said, Prabhupada, if somebody's having trouble, with sex desire or whatever, what should you do? He said, chant Hare Krishna more. That's all. I remember Prabhupada saying in L.A. before I was initiated, he was referring to the verse in the Gita, Rasoham Mapsu Kaunteya, I am the taste in water. And he said, even a wino or a drunk man, if he drinks his wine and he thinks that Krishna's the taste in that, he can make some advancement by by that consciousness. That consciousness will be purifying to him. Not the drinking of the wine, of course, but if he has that consciousness, that will be something progressive, and he can, he should think like that even. I guarded Prabhupada's room in Portland, Oregon. He was there for a few days. And I asked his servant, what do you do with Prabhupada's bead bags? He goes, well, I give them away. I said, well, can I have one? And he said, sure. And he sent me one in Montreal. And I still have that bead bag, and I kept the beads that Prabhupada chanted on at my initiation. They're in there, and they're on my little Prabhupada altar. But during that Portland stay, we went to some kind of a New Age meeting where Prabhupada spoke. And when he was speaking, there was a lady in the audience who had a little child, and the child was crying. And Prabhupada said, could you please take the child out? And the lady said, oh, is the child disturbing you? Prabhupada said, no, the child's not disturbing me, it's disturbing you and everyone else. It was in New York, and Prabhupada was on a morning walk. And as they were walking along, Prabhupada stopped and looked up at some birds that were singing in the tree. And he said, oh, they're chanting Hare Krishna. And the devotees looked at each other, stunned, thinking, wow, Prabhupada understands the language of the birds. And they said, Prabhupada, are they really chanting Hare Krishna? And he said, sounds like it to me. It was the 1977 Mayapur festival. And at that time, Prabhupada was sick, to the point where he wasn't speaking, wasn't participating in any functions, wasn't giving class. And everybody was very disturbed because we didn't know what to make of all this. At any point, they had a kirtan contest between all the temples. And at that time, I was the president of Chicago, and we were really into kirtan. In fact, I had imbibed the Bengali style, and I was introducing it in Chicago, and later on it became popular all over the movement. And we chanted at a preliminary round, I guess, and we won that round, and we were going to go on to the finals. It was just whittled down to a few groups. But at the same time, unfortunately, there was a little bit of controversy, a little bit of antagonism towards our group. Because we were so much into kirtan, people took it the wrong way and started criticizing us. And I told the men in my group to just ignore it because that wasn't the mood that we were in, and we didn't have to put up with that. But it got out of hand, so much so that it bothered me. And at one point, Tamal Krishna came up to me and he said, well, Uttama, it looks like your group's going to be in the finals. I guess you'll probably win. That's what everybody thinks. And I said, no, I don't think so. And he said, why not? I said, because I'm leaving. I'm not even going to chant. He said, well, why not? I said, because nobody here is into the right mood. They're making it into a political thing. They're trying to agitate all my men, and they're saying that we're into it for non-devotional reasons, which is completely wrong. So as a protest, I'm leaving because nobody appreciates it. And he said, that's not true. Prabhupada appreciates it. And I said, well, how do you know? He said, well, because when you were chanting at the first kirtan, we were up in the room with Prabhupada. And we were just sitting there. We had been sitting with him all day, in fact, for days. And he was just sitting there. He wasn't looking at us. He didn't say a word. He didn't move. His head was down on his knee most of the time. And he was virtually motionless, not responding or anything. And your kirtan group came on and you were chanting, and then we looked and I noticed that Prabhupada was tapping his hand in time with the kirtan. He was tapping on his leg or something like that. And then at one point the kirtan reached a crescendo, and the women responded as they do in Bengal with that kind of yodeling thing. And it just built up, and Prabhupada looked up and he said something like, just see, this is ecstasy. And he said, and we were all just taken aback because Prabhupada hadn't said anything. But at that point, he said that. He said, so Prabhupada appreciated your kirtan. And I said, okay, I'll stay. Je anilo